From antiquity, it was believed that the idea of empty space is a conceptual impossibility. Space is nothing but an abstraction we use to compare different arrangements of the objects. Concerning time, it was believed that there can be no lapse of time without change occurring somewhere. Time is merely a measure of cycles of change within the world. Then, in 1686, Isaac Newton founded classical mechanics on the view that space is real and distinct from objects, and that time is real and passes uniformly without regard to whether anything moves in the world. He spoke of absolute space and absolute time as a stage within which matter existed and moved as time flowed at a constant rate. It was understood that space and time tell matter how to move, but matter has no effect on space and time. We have seen that special relativity broke the paradigm of absolute space and absolute time because the constancy of the speed of light required a trade-off between space and time across different inertial frames. In addition, and more to our point, the idea that space and time act on matter, but that matter does not act on space and time, troubled Einstein. With these considerations in mind, and noting that light curved in a gravitational field, Einstein proposed that the mass of an object does indeed act on the space and time it exists in. Specifically, he proposed that the presence of matter curves space-time. To see how this can be, we need to examine the geometry of space a little deeper. We'll start with the Euclidean geometry of flat surfaces and generalize it to curved spacetime. We can now graph light using our spacetime coordinates. For this, we use the distance light travels in 1 second for the units on the x-axis. This gives us the line running diagonally up the right side for light moving in the positive direction. At this scale, we cannot distinguish between the speeds achieved by snails, animals, cars, planes, and rockets from the line that represents standing still. Here's the line for protons at the end of the Large Hadron Collider's linear accelerator, traveling at 1/3 the speed of light. And, at this scale, the line for protons in the LHC itself is indistinguishable from the speed of light. Now we can run the light line up the left side for light moving in the negative direction. If we then extend the x-axis line to be a plane that we'll use to represent three-dimensional space, we can rotate the light line 360 degrees to create a cone, the light cone. This is the four-dimensional space-time graph. A point on this graph represents an event with 4 coordinates, x, y, and z for space, and t for time. A mathematician named Hermann Minkowski developed the geometry for Einstein's space-time, so you may sometimes hear space-time referred to as Minkowski space. The four-dimensional length of a line in Minkowski space is referred to as proper time or proper distance. Space-time inside the cone is called time-like because the length of connected points have positive proper time. This makes all points inside the light cone reachable. In other words, it is possible for an event at an earlier time within the cone to be the cause of an event at a later time within the cone. At the speed of light, the lines connecting the events run up the edge of the cone, and the four-dimensional length of the line connecting these events, proper time, is 0. cause and effect can still hold. The space outside the cone is called spacelike. The proper time of the line connecting a point inside the cone with a point outside the cone will have a negative length. And like the boat example in our speed of light segment, where negative time simply meant that you could not get there from here, so the negative proper time simply means that you cannot get from one of these points inside the cone to the other point outside the cone. In other words, no event from within the cone can ever be the cause of an event outside the cone. If we go back in time, as well as forward in time, we get the full space-time diagram. Here we see that no past event outside the cone can be the cause of any event we see today.
QuantumLaserPointers.com.
Quantum Laser Pointers brings you the infamous double-slit experiment right in the palm of your hand. In 1801, English physicist Thomas Young performed this experiment to determine if light was a particle or a wave. A laser shines a coherent beam of light through a film disc containing two parallel slits. Light striking the wall behind the slits produces a classic interference pattern. This surprising result means light passes through the parallel slits not as particles, but as waves.
Visit our website or subscribe to our YouTube channel now. Be among the first to see our new line of double-slit lasers, QuantumLaserPointers.com.
The information presented in this video is certainly the stuff of science fiction. But the question is there or has there ever been science fiction? Could it be that the science fiction writers of yesteryear and today are simply in the know of future plans of suppressed technology now in the hands of certain secretive agencies? Famous science fiction writers of the past, such as Robert Heinlein, H.G. Wells, and Aldous Huxley, were certainly insiders that might have known the intricacies of what the true state of science fact was. Did these science fiction writers from the past, or science fiction producers of the present day like George Lucas or Steven Spielberg, simply relate, in a fictional format, science or future plans hidden from the general public, and pass it off as fantasy? Answers to these questions and many others might come from the research done and comments made by Alfred Lamberman Weber. Dr. Weber is a graduate of Yale University and Yale Law School in International Law, and was a Fulbright Scholar in International Economic Integration in Uruguay. He's taught economics at Yale University and constitutional law at the University of Texas. Alfred was general counsel to the New York City Environmental Protection Administration, a futurist at Stanford Research Institute, incidentally where he directed the proposed 1977 Carter White House extraterrestrial communications study. Alfred was also an NGO delegate to the United Nations and the Unispace Conference, and is a judge on the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal. Dr. Weber is also the author of Exopolitics, Politics, Government, and Law in the Universe, a book that founded the field of exopolitics, which is the science of relations among intelligent civilizations in the multiverse. On an interview done for Volcano Radio, Alfred discusses the realities of time travel.
I know that these are kind of hard concepts to explain, so I hope that I can. One of my tasks has been to report, and in some part to be what we call enmeshed in the secret time travel and teleportation programs of the United States and what I would really call the matrix government of the planet. And they have operated on the basis of using secret time travel and teleportation technology to govern the planet politically for at least the last 40 years. And people can go to exopolitics.com, and on the right-hand menu, there's a link that says time travel and teleportation, and click there, and you'll see a whole raft of links to articles that explain this and give all of the sources. Articles like Time Travel and Political Control that explain how the matrix authorities that have control of time travel technology travel to the future, obtain information, and then control us politically on the basis of that information by pre-identifying future presidents, prime ministers, and then co-opting them 20 years in advance and then grooming them as secret CIA or secret MI5 or MI6 operatives, so that what you think is a president or a prime minister is really almost a lifelong operative. What occurred to me is that in real time, in 1999, I wrote a book called Exopolitics, which established the science of exopolitics, which is the science of relations among intelligent civilizations in the multiverse. And it was published in the year 2005. Well, what occurred, unknown to me, was that the CIA and DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, time traveled that book from at least 2005 back to at least 1971. And I was told this in 2005 by a project participant in the Secret Time Travel Project who had seen it in 1971 in person, Lieutenant Commander Andrew D. Basiago in the U.S. Navy. And so in 1971, at the time that it was time traveled back to, and that this whistleblower had seen it, I was general counsel of the Environmental Protection Administration of New York City. And part of my job was to speak to the public in New York about protecting the environment, the air quality, water quality, noise abatement, things of this sort. And one day I was asked to speak at this organization. I said, fine. And what was different about it is when the person came to pick me up, he was not a student or a housewife that tended to be the environmentalist. He was a man dressed in a suit and very formal. And we traveled for about 2 hours, and I arrived at this nondescript office building, and there were 50 other men in suits. And I instantly knew through my double vision that these were not environmentalists. These looked like government operatives. These looked like
spooks, we call them. Spooks. Yeah.
So I kind of stayed in character and gave my standard environmental stump speech, but they were sort of smirking at me, and I could tell that they knew about something about me that I didn't know, and that they were surveying me, and a number of them were smirking at me, trying to get me off game. But I just, soldiered on, and at the end of it, they applauded me and gave me a mug, which I brought back to my office. It said Delaware Valley Industrial Engineering Association. Now, I searched for that, and no such association exists. So, in 2005, Andrew D. Basiago told me this, and we both put together that was a room full of CIA and Department of Defense officials who had my book that they had time traveled back from 2005. They may also have been carrying out real-time time travel surveillance on me, either by Chronovisor, which is like either a 2D or 3D television screen, which they tune into any time-space coordinates, A, B, C, D, E, and they just tune in and they just follow what you're doing. They had been surveying me in time and space in the future, and they knew that I would be in the future revealing many of their state secrets.
Now, here's the question for you based on that.
Yeah.
And I won't interrupt you too many times, but it might have some sort of adverse effect on events to come. Is it risky? Was it risky by them to do that?
There are certain constraints of what we call time science. And so all of their technology and all of the movements have to operate within the rules of time science. And so that's how the time science, that's how all of the time travel systems operate within the constraints of time science, so as not to be a disruptive force. And that's one of the principal reasons why this technology has to be made public and brought under public controls, because otherwise it could be turned, as you just suggested, into a weapon.
Of course, because you could, there are financial things you could do. You could go back and you could speculate on certain things because you know what's happening in the markets. At the very least, you could go back and start betting on NBA championships and Super Bowl championships and all sorts of stuff like that, and enhance yourself in the future, Alfred. It's got amazing implications, you know.
Yes. One of the I've spoken to at least 6 whistleblowers from the top secret U.S. time travel and teleportation program, one of whom was a U.S. presidential advisor to a president, and he's an extraordinary man. And what he told me, for example, was that the reason why U.S. President Nixon was taken out of office, the kind of the cover story was Watergate, but it was because he was objecting to all of the excesses and financial speculation and money laundering that personnel and factions within the CIA were using in the time travel and teleportation program in secret. And that's why the CIA set him up in Watergate and took him out. So that's some of the behind the scenes history that is very much different from what we're fed in public.
And I must just mention now, in case some of our listeners want teleportation, it's the idea is that I can walk through a door here in Manchester and instantaneously come out another door in Florida, right alongside Alfred, basically. That's the essence. Is or am I wrong in saying that?
Well, it would be about 3 or 4 minutes, or maybe less. But that's the basic idea. Those of us here, as a matter of public policy, and this would have happened. And in fact, one of my colleagues, again, the whistleblower Andrew D. Basiago, one of his jobs in the program back in 1971 was to routinely go to a DARPA forward time base in the year 2045. We're now in 2014. But by 2045, teleportation along that timeline was a fairly common thing. This has many advantages. Number one, it eliminates all forms of pollution from fossil fuel. Right now, we're pushing around 4,000 pounds of steel that you wrap around your waist in order to go to the corner to pick up a bottle of milk. So that is one of the most inefficient forms of transportation around. Plus, you've got all of the concrete in roads, in highways, all of the land use in trains. Jane Jacobs writes about how all of the cities have been destroyed by rail yards and by highways and overpasses. So by switching out of the fossil fuel and intercombustion world, we move away from this gross misuse of land use and polluting technology to a non-polluting technology. And we bring back to life all of the inner cities. He said that there, the teleportation units were built into the walls, and you would go up to a wall, dial up to where you wanted to go, and then you would be taken there. This is a goal that we are pushing now for the release of these teleportation technologies and to move beyond the fossil fuel world. And the only reason that they're not is that Donald H. Rumsfeld, back in 1971-72, who was a member of the Richard Nixon cabinet, as well as Henry Kissinger, who was the national security advisor, said that this is going to maintain a military secret so that the United States can deliver its troops to the battlefield by teleportation anywhere around the world it wants to.
Alfred, I was coming to that. I was just going to say that to you. That would be one of the most important applications for them, wouldn't it? That's all they would think about. Yeah, we can get armies overseas in 4 minutes. Bang. Yeah. And this would virtually transform our world into a paradise planet. You would no longer have oil wars. You would get rid of a major source of pollution, which is fossil fuel. Look at what China's bringing online now with the coal, with all of these new energy sources that are what we call quantum access. This is accessing the quantum of energy of these new Tesla-based energy sources. And there's no reason for these military intelligence agencies to hang on to these secrets, which they have for over 40 years, because it's killing the planet and it's killing humanity. And there are minority factions that want to do that, want to kill the surface dwelling humans. They call them surface dwellers, and then supplant the surface dwellers with a gene pool Mars colony that they've been developing on Mars of elite humans with superior DNA that they'll just bring on after they've gotten rid of us all surface dwellers. And I think that just yesterday, a woman came forward with a leak. She was a former NASA employee who saw back in 1979 a person walking around on Mars. Of course, the U.S. and the U.K. have had bases on Mars and personnel on Mars at the elite level since at least the 1960s.
Alfred characterizes a control system striving through all means possible to maintain its hold over humanity. These controllers appear to be using technology far beyond that which the average human conceives as possible. In considering such notions that stretch our reality, it's important not only to consider the source and the information, but also take into account the confined nature of what we've been taught is possible. Taught incidentally by the control system itself. Could it be that we've been trapped in a matrix reality constructed to limit our conceptualization of what's possible? Could this have been done to elicit an automatic reaction of disbelief to any data that conflicts with the reality taught in schools and then reinforced by the media? Is science fiction a mechanism to categorize ideas into what is fact and what is fantasy? Could it be an instrument designed to teach us what to believe and what to disbelieve, thereby enabling the controllers to hide advanced technology which they use to maintain control, and then hide it in plain sight? Certainly we are schooled to the notion that we live in a physical reality, governed by the laws of Newtonian science. But this notion defines a particularly rigid set of parameters for what is feasible, for what is real. Cemented in the notion of physicality we are incapable of grasping anything outside of a seemingly material world. Could this be the controller's greatest tool of suppression? Denying us the knowledge of who we are, what we are, and the rules that govern the omniverse? This confines us in a prison without bars, a narrow range of possibilities outside of which the controllers can operate with impunity. Without being able to break free from the stunted vision of what's achievable, we remain ensnared in a slave-like existence, subject to the horrors, isolation, separation, wars, and limitations which they choose for us. Later in the interview, Dr. Weber reconceptualizes a reality in which many more possibilities abound, and perhaps freedom from the matrix can be found.
Is time a construct?
Well, it's a dimension. We now live in what's called a time-space hologram. We are inside a virtual reality. It's like if we're inside the virtual reality that you yourself would watch through a pair of Google glasses. And people can read my most recent book called The Dimensional Ecology of the Omniverse. It's the product of 5 years research that was started by a request from Oxford University Press, which is a division of Oxford. And it's perfectly scientifically, all of the evidence there is based on replicable scientific experiments. What we are in now, yourself as Richie, myself as Alfred, we can call ourselves avatars. All of us humans, all of those listening to this program, all of us 7 billion on this planet, what we are is we are time-space avatars inside of a time-space virtual reality that's a time-space hologram, where time is one of the dimensions. It's composed of multiple timelines. The good news is this, that as of December 21st, 2012, the holographic timeline that humanity has been on has shifted from, I would call, a duality consciousness-based timeline, in which you can call a catastrophic timeline, to a positive timeline. And that's why all these end-of-the-world scenarios have not occurred, and why all the false flags that they're trying to get off the ground, like World War III, they don't have traction for, because as of December 21st, 2012, the portal, the interdimensional portal at the core of our universe has started to broadcast waves of unity consciousness, which is we are one. Duality consciousness is I win, you lose. And that's what the Matrix has been operating under. And as of December 21st, 2012, is shifted to unity consciousness. So any plans, organization, attempts, thoughts, that are trying to impose duality consciousness will not prosper. And individuals, thoughts, organizations that are in unity consciousness gain traction on this new holographic timeline. The other good news is that this being a virtual reality, and I being the avatar Alfred, you being the avatar Richie, we have our 7 billion fellow avatars here. Each of us is connected to a non-local soul, which is based in what we call the interlife dimension. That soul can be leading multiple lives in multiple virtual realities, not only as humans, but they can be leading it as intelligent fish or other forms. So this is a very advanced form. And what souls do in the interlife, also between lives, is that they have very important functions co-creating the universes that they incarnate into. There's a recent paper by 2 scientists at Stanford showing that they were asked, how many universes are there in the multiverse? And the response was, there are so many, it's humongous. And the human mind can't even comprehend. But if you went to write that number out in 12-point type, that number would be more than 260 million miles long.
Wow,
that's how many universes there are in the multiverse. So we are in a humongous reality, each of which contains so many intelligent civilizations that we couldn't comprehend. How many? Basically, this is a spiritual, I would call it a struggle or a war between matrix forces who want to keep as many souls from moving up in density of consciousness, from being trapped in, let's say, lower third density where they are now, and moving up the ladder of consciousness where they would no longer be subject to. And so money was actually invented as a form of control. It's a form of control that if you research it, it goes back to the temples of Babylon and even before, where it was used by the Mardukian priests where they would require it as payment for sex with the temple priestesses / prostitutes, where the farmers would bring in their grain. And so it's been mixed up with concepts of God, sex, money, prostitution, and it's a form of imprisonment. And as we know from near-death experiences, one can't take money with you. You can't take things with you. All you can take with you is knowledge and experience and karma. Yeah. So that's where one should concentrate one's energy during life. You see, at this time is the coming together of spirituality and science. And this is kind of the culmination of this play, right? Because we are on a timeline that has a script. We're inside a virtual reality. To put it simply plainly, we're inside a video game. It's like you came in, you have your pound or whatever it is, and you put it in there, and you're playing the video game called life, right? And now we're coming to the culmination of that video game. And at the video game, everybody gets to know everything. Yeah. So one of the purposes that I wrote Omniverse now is that it uses science and it lets everybody know everything. So it's all out there. It's all there to be known now. There are no, see, with the new timeline, with the new unity consciousness, the old program of I win, you lose, which is what the Illuminati banked on under the old game. What happened is that on December 21st, 2012, they changed video games. Well, look, everybody who has incarnated now actually signed on for this. They fought for these places. So now, why it's so difficult is because they're competing with their own soul, within their own consciousness and minds, between the grasp of the Illuminati program, which is, listen to us, sensation program, war, disease, crime, and poverty, sex cells, materialism, fear, and they're just trying to let go within themselves of the programming of the old timeline and just try, Armageddon is within. So they signed up for this, and it's their inner process. And so that's what makes it so neat.
There is no doubt that we are living in a time of great opportunity and challenge on the planet. Consciousness wants to shift to a higher level of operation, one of light and love instead of our current state of darkness and fear. It's unlike any other time in history, and we are certainly privileged to be incarnate during this period when this massive change is underway. It is a time of expanding consciousness, a time of opening our hearts and minds to ideas that we never thought possible, such as time travel, teleportation, and life on nearby planets. A major trap that prolongs the existence of duality consciousness in ourselves and in society in general is our believing in and adherence to the matrix created and controlled consensual reality. This reality describes a physical world of lack, with humans competing with one another for scarce resources. It embodies the win-lose mentality of the old timeline, where survival of the most ruthless, the most uncaring, is a fact of life. This materialistic worldview enshrines the individual ego, its enhancement, and the accumulation of money and status as the only worthwhile human endeavor. Success at all costs is the credo in this crumbling reality. This system lacks a concrete morality, and whatever actions are necessary to enhance the success of the ego are acceptable, even if those actions damage others, the environment, or mankind in general. It also dictates strict conformance to social norms and severe punishment for those straying outside of the parameters of what is acceptable behavior or acceptable thought. Enslavement by the monetary system and fear of violence keeps this reality in place. This is the control matrix of the old timeline at its essence. Lurking just outside of this core structure is what is known as the margins. The mind control system of the matrix allows for thoughts and ideas to stray from the core into the margins, to give the illusion of freedom of thought. Marginal subjects are items like veganism, organic gardening, and some alternative healing techniques, and other ideas that won't affect the existence of the status quo or interfere with the profitability of a corporate endeavor, such as the pharmaceutical industry. Ideas may move from the margins to the core consensual reality and back to the margins, based upon the whims of the controllers and the corporate goals of the matrix. The forbidden zone is called the fringe. It is in this area where human consciousness can expand to what is possible and create new neural pathways to enhance learning and growth. Alfred was talking about fringe subjects, subjects of which knowledge is forbidden, and thought is considered frivolous, if not ridiculous. It is into the fringe that we must venture to expand our knowledge, and therefore foster the expansion of consciousness. Forbidding fringe knowledge keeps us trapped and will prolong the win-lose mentality, violence and separation of the duality consciousness. As Alfred states in his interview, on the new positive timeline, all will be known. But is this the cause or the effect of the shift of consciousness? Will all be known because this new timeline is unfolding? Or will the new timeline be facilitated by our individually and collectively exploring the fringe and finding out what's really happening? Logically, it will be a combination of both. Change will be facilitated by our exploration of what is possible, by exploring the fringe, and also by knowledge spontaneously emerging from behind the veil. We simply must be open to ideas outside of the trap of consensual reality. The bottom line is, don't be afraid of the fringe. Explore it. Play with it. Discard its ideas if found to be incorrect, and build on its ideas if they have validity. To be compatible with the new unity consciousness, you must have an open mind, capable of forging new neural pathways from new concepts to produce new ideas and solutions. But follow the fringe. This is where the expansion of consciousness resides. It is where our positive future lies.
T4 Wormhole Geometry. In this next section, we will be discussing how to create a wormhole. There is much discussion in the modern scientific journals about how to establish an open portal using quantum entanglement and action at a distance, and much speculation about how to increase and control the diameter of the wormhole using exotic matter such as strange quarks or possibly antimatter particles. This diagram depicts the standard model by astrophysicist John Gribben. While there remains much discussion about the time tunnel portion of the equation itself, shown here on the left half of this coffee table, there is little consideration for the cause for the equally drastic warping to the surface fabric of the continuum on the right side. In this diagram, I offer the premise that a black hole operating at a roughly right angle from the time tunnel itself could affect the drastic warping of space-time on both sides to form the time tunnel on one side and the 180-degree bending of the surface fabric of the space-time continuum on the other. T4 Wormhole Mathematics. In this model, I am depicting the entry vectors necessary to penetrate from between the blue arc representing an event horizon in motion to the centroid in the lower left corner representing the conjunction of the combined motion of the exterior surface of the event horizon in blue and interior trajectory of a tangential wormhole within the black hole in red, and the law of infinitely repeating halves in a gnomonic pattern of expansion-contraction that inverts the dead space within a black hole to the baby universe within its core singularity. These are the extrapolated sets of trajectories for motions possible on the previous model. We see the blue line represents the event horizon, the red arc the tangential wormhole, the green arrow the path to or from the singularity, and the black line the motion of an object outside but relative to the gravity exerted by the event horizon. Those models calculate the mathematical trajectories for entering a black hole. The following diagrams represent the mathematical trajectories for navigating any wormhole. Here we see a square, each of the corners of which exerts a pull affecting the trajectory of any object passed from one corner to another along its surface. Here what we are seeing is the individual trajectories given all overlapping in the previous diagram, here exploded schematically to each be viewable individually. Here we can see the above left combines the two on the left below it, while the upper right combines the models below it on the right. Each trajectory is plotted with a different origin and destination pair, and thus each has its own pattern of path. T4 Cosmology. In this diagram, along a file to the right, we see the now familiar set of four space manifolds that represent time. We see then on the left that each of these four space manifold shapes corresponds to one of the elemental forces in our local universe, also in a progression of decreasing complexity following the inverse square law outward from the Big Bang, depicted in the upper left corner of the matrix. In this model we see the manner these, now also elementally attributed four manifold shapes, correspond to the geometric gnomon discussed initially in the second section. The gnomon in this diagram thus traces the division of the four elemental forces prior to the first Planck time following the Big Bang. T4 conclusions and findings. The most basic initial premise for the geometries of the T4 models is depicted here. We see time labeled T conserved around and about three axes of direction labeled X, Y, Z. The meaning of this diagram is that T surrounds the three dimensions as well as permeates them throughout. Below C, the speed of light, space-time operates in the direction past to future, but above C, faster than photons, time-space operates in the direction future to past. Here again we see the trefoil on the right labeled according to the shadow it casts on the left. These labels and the outline of the trefoil's shadow are the initial T4 premise depicted. Here is the final depiction of the T4 model for time travel. We see time-space above and space-time below may be between their layers, able to be warped and twisted, allowing a body to be carried along a pathway around opposite the standard temporal current without violating the natural laws of physics at play. This is the essence of the elsewhere drawn-out rolling Boyle diagram for the surface of the continuum. In this final diagram of the set, we see the central three spheres represent from top to bottom, past, present, future, but that the pole beyond the lowest inner sphere of future is past, and likewise that the pole beyond the highest sphere, that of past, is future. So we see there are larger cycles and smaller cycles that operate relative and can even be reversed to one another.
QuantumLaserPointers.com.
Quantum Laser Pointers brings you the infamous double-slit experiment right in the palm of your hand. In 1801, English physicist Thomas Young performed this experiment to determine if light was a particle or a wave. A laser shines a coherent beam of light through a film disc containing two parallel slits. Light striking the wall behind the slits produces a classic interference pattern. This surprising result means light passes through the parallel slits not as particles, but as waves. When the peaks of two waves overlap, it creates a band of light. When the peak of one wave meets the valley of another, light is canceled out. Variations of this experiment spurred public debates between Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr on the true nature of reality. It's been called the granddaddy of all quantum weirdness. This convenient and affordable double-slit laser was designed for personal enjoyment and education.
Visit our website or subscribe to our YouTube channel now. Be among the first to see our new line of double-slit lasers. QuantumLaserPointers.com.
Our next guest is a world-renowned physicist and best-selling author whose latest book is entitled The Fabric of the Cosmos. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Brian Greene. I have no knowledge of what you're going to talk about, so please, I'm begging your patience and indulgence. Tell us about the string theory. That's one of your specialties. Is that correct?
That's right. So Albert Einstein, for the last 30 years of his life, sought what he called a unified theory of physics. That would be a single equation, a single idea, a single principle that might describe everything in the universe. And he never found it.
Is that reasonable, to have one theory that explains everything?
It's a good question. We don't know for sure, but the progress of science has been a winnowing down of a variety of explanations that work here, there, or someplace else to one more powerful explanation that describes more and more phenomena.
That would simplify everything, wouldn't it?
It'd be great. Imagine we had one equation that could tell us how the universe began, how it evolved to the form that we see. That'd be amazing.
So is this it then, the string theory? Is that what he was unable to put his finger on?
I don't know.
You're witness.
I hope it is.
All right, well, now, to try and explain to me the string theory.
The basic idea is to rewrite the rules of what matter and energy are made up of. So imagine you take a powerful microscope and you magnify this tabletop so that you can see the inner workings, the things that make it up. We all know that if you magnify it enough, you get to atoms. But we know that atoms are not the end of the story. They have little particles, electrons, that go around the nucleus, which has neutrons and protons. And there are even particles inside of those, known as quarks. That is where the conventional ideas stop. String theory comes along and suggests that there's another layer that so far nobody thought of. Inside an electron, inside a quark, inside any particle is a little filament, kind of looks like a string. And this little filament is a filament of energy that can vibrate, like the string on a violin vibrates in different patterns that your ear senses musical notes. These little strings vibrate in different patterns that produce the different particles. So every particle arises from the different vibrations of this new entity, the string. That's the unification. Everything comes from one thing.
And how then does that resolve all the other heretofore unresolved questions about existence?
Well, it's a big question, but the previous problems were that Einstein's ideas of how gravity works, his general theory of relativity, and the other theory of the 20th century known as quantum physics were at loggerheads. They each said the other was wrong, even though each worked in its own domain. String theory finally describes a universe in which those two ideas are put together, stitched together into one framework, and we think it makes sense.
Right. So how is my life better for this? Just looking at it very selfishly, what do we now know we didn't know before?
Well, a big question is, how did the universe begin? And we cannot answer that question. Some people think that the Big Bang is an explanation of how the universe began. It's not. The Big Bang is a theory of how the universe evolved from a split second after whatever brought it into existence. And the reason why we've been unable to look right back at time zero to figure out how it really began is that conflict between Einstein's ideas of gravity and the laws of quantum physics. So string theory may be able to, it hasn't yet, we're working on it today feverishly, it may be able to answer the question, how did the universe begin? And I don't know how it will affect your everyday life, but to me, if we really had a sense of how the universe really began, I think that would really alert us to our own place in the cosmos in a deep way.
And is this the kind of thing that you deal with all the time or not? Because is it likely that the more you know and the more you don't understand about the beginning of the universe, the more that builds a case for it being created by an all-powerful being? Or does that not figure in your science?
Well, science can never rule out the possibility that there was an all-powerful being, a god, if you will, that created the universe. You can never rule that out, but it's not a very satisfying explanation from the point of view of a scientist, because we want an explanation that really understands the nuts and bolts of how the universe began. You can ask any question and say, oh, God made it that way, right, and you can say that, but we have learned that if you look deeply, you can get more deep explanations, and we're hoping the deepest one will tell us how the universe began.
And is it possible, if you solve the question, you can then say, yes, here is how that all-powerful being created the universe? That would satisfy everybody, wouldn't it?
You could phrase it that way, and if that makes you happy, that is perfectly fine with me. But what I would say is, I don't know that you're going to need the all-powerful being. You can't rule it out, but we may have laws that, in and of themselves, may explain everything. It's possible.
Are you confident that in your lifetime there will be a viable, satisfactory explanation for everything in the universe?
Well, everything is a big subject. But I think, I think that we may be able to understand the basic ingredients that make up everything, the basic laws by which they interact and influence each other, and in that way we'd understand the universe at that very deep fundamental level. But can I predict what you're going to have for lunch tomorrow based on those laws? I doubt it. Yeah. It's hard to talk about things of such complexity with laws that are so fundamental.
Macaroni and cheese.
There you go.
Now, when Einstein was doing his work, was it that he was so brilliant, or he was one of the few working in that area at the time? Are there many guys like are you like Einstein now? Do you have the qualifications that he had?
No.
Yeah. Are there guys like Einstein now doing the same work?
There's really nobody out there today who I think really compares to the genius of Einstein. I mean, in 1905, we're now celebrating the 100th year anniversary, Einstein wrote 4 papers that changed our understanding of the universe. 4 papers that any of us would be happy to have written half of one of those papers.
What are the 4?
Special relativity, space and time, not what we think they are, E = mc², which we've seen the consequences of in many ways in our everyday life and in the universe at large. The existence of atoms, he proved, through Brownian motion, it's called. And the most important paper was on something called the photoelectric effect, which launched quantum physics. Wow. That is the paper he won the Nobel Prize for, not for relativity.
And what about that wait a half hour after eating before going swimming? Was that, was that Einstein or... Why do I even... I don't know. All right. And what about the notion of time travel? We can't do that, can we? Is it possible, but we can't do it?
We can absolutely travel to the future, and I don't just mean with each age. If you want to see what things are like 1 billion years from now on planet Earth, Einstein laid out a blueprint. He showed us how to do that.
Really?
You build a ship that goes near the speed of light. We can't do that yet today. That's a technical detail. But if you build a ship that could go near the speed of light, you travel out for 6 months, you turn around, you come back. You've aged 1 year, 6 months, 6 months. But because of your incredible speed, time slows down for you relative to time for everybody else on planet Earth. So when you get out of your ship, you'll be 1 year older, but people here will be 10,000, a million, or 1 billion years older, depending on how close to the speed of light you went.
Wow. Wow. And is that a likelihood ever?
That is hard to answer. You know, technology grows by leaps and bounds. I don't know. But the thing I would stress is this is not controversial from the point of view of how time behaves. People have taken clocks, atomic clocks, the most accurate ones in the world, put one on the ground, put the other on a jet, a Pan Am jet. You know, Pan Am used to have these planes. And they flew that jet around the world, and then they took the clock off and compared the clock that was moving with the clock that was stationary, and they differed by exactly the amount that Einstein said they would. It's only a few billionths of a second, since planes don't go that fast, but this is established fact. This is not controversial.
Wow. Does your head ache all the time? Is it just... Does any of this make sense to you? Well, I appreciate you putting up with me, but I'm just as dumb as they come. But this is it. This is the book. It's called The Elegant, The Fabric of the Cosmos. The other one was The Elegant Universe. A pleasure listening to you. Thank you very much. Brian Greene, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be right back, everybody.
One of the most unusual consequences of the speed of light being a constant for all observers is that the flow of time itself is not immutable. It too must be relative to the inertial frame's motion. Here's a good way to see why this must now be the case. Here's a simple light clock. Light travels between mirrors at the end of a known length. For our purposes, we'll make it a very long length, say 150,000 kilometers. That way, one round trip will mark 1 full second. Now, if we put the clock into motion with respect to a ground-based observer, we see that the light has to travel further. And because its speed is constant, it will take longer. The moving light clock is therefore running slower than a stationary duplicate. This is called time dilation. It's the geometry of the situation that gives us the conversion factor. If I were on a 10-hour flight from LA to Paris, traveling at 800 kilometers per hour, I would lose just under a nanosecond. Way too small to notice. But for faster-moving spacecraft, it can be quite significant and critically important. For example, orbiting GPS satellites travel at 3,874 meters per second with respect to the Earth. They use cesium atomic clocks to keep time. They measure time to within 1 second in 1,400,000 years. But these onboard clocks lose 7,214 nanoseconds a day due to time dilation. If onboard clocks aren't corrected regularly based on Lorentz time dilation formula, the position data they produce would be off by kilometers in less than a day.